Jeff, I'm going to start with a question to you, if I can, because I know that this is something you are working through yourself over at US Bank. What key developments or shifts have you seen over the course of the past 12 months that are really shaping how you think about the workplace of the future?
That's a question that is very prevalent now. And if one thing the pandemic has, something good that has come out from the pandemic is the speed of work. It was a huge transformation to go from everyone working in the office to getting everyone capable to work from home. And whatever the thoughts were on working from home, this pandemic has created a realization that working from home is an option, and it has put the infrastructure in place for people to be able to work from home. I know we were going at breakneck speed to be able to get a customer service representatives who interact with our customers first and foremost up and running, and then all of our technology and the rest of the organization to be able to support what was needed. And this creates a change of outlook. There are many variables that go into this, but the outlook changes on the hybrid model of working from home. Companies will now be looking at, and I know I'm expressing my views here on, should we have the real estate that we have? Is it possible to create what we call a hotel model, where we define essential employees that need to come in and are required to come in because of their job. And then you have non-essential employees, which could be a big number, 70, 80%, who could work from home. You have situations where you have to roll up your sleeves, get on the board, draw, and those could be when these guys need to come in. So how do you make it seamless for them to just come in? And just like a hotel, you book a cube or an office, you come in, you book it for 3 days, you clean up your place, you check out, you're gone. And so it is no longer frowned upon to work from home or look at it as an option. It is definitely looked at as it is an option. It doesn't affect productivity. And we have seen in the last 12 months that things are moving along nicely. So we see that hotel model being a viable option for us going forward.
Yeah, great stuff. Many thanks, Jeff. Yeah, I certainly agree that the stigma around remote working has certainly been removed. There's no longer a perception that everybody's just at home, with their feet up, doing nothing, having a virtual day off. One of the complications with moving to this hybrid model is, I guess it's not always super easy to clearly define who needs to work from home, who needs to work in the office. It will depend, I guess, on tasks and particular projects. So how are you kind of thinking about managing that very complex, more task-based or project-based approach?
So a little bit is, we look at interactions of people. So we have engineers and developers who do a lot of work independently. There's not much interaction. We have agile models. When we need them, we bring them in. We have the PI meetings that they can come in, participate, and go back to development. And then based on release cycles, they can release code. And the next PI, it's a cycle. So interactions with your customers or internally is the criteria that we're going to rely on. And we are also going to be looking at, this is going to be an evolving model. So there's no defined, we'll have to study as we go. And we'll check on, the logins, people using their key cards to get in. Are they getting in? Are they using their facilities? Have you had any breakdowns of people who were deemed as work from home or not in the office, and it's causing us issues? It'll be an evolution and a learning model as we go. So that's how we're going to cautiously approach this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess this kind of throws back to something we discussed yesterday, this idea of a permanent learning organisation and that kind of growth mindset. Laurel, let's perhaps come to you next, if we can. Obviously, you've been working firms, both large and small, transition to remote and virtual ways of working for a number of years now, pre-pandemic. And I guess you've seen that accelerate over the past 12 months. But what do you see firms need to think and perhaps do differently as we start to project forward towards this more hybrid model?
Well, historically, the highest risk of hybrid organizations is the imbalance of employee experience between on-site workers and off-site workers. So really, there is no one-size-fits-all solution for any of these organizations. The key really will be to create a custom model, just like Jeff is talking about, for the organization that works best for the unique workflows and processes, for the unique culture of the organization, to really identify what is the distribution of their team and what regions do they need to cater to. There's a lot of X factors. That means that it's not just, see what the other competitor is doing or another large, very prominent remote friendly company, see what they're doing and then templatize that for your organization. It's not that simple. So we do need to come into it with a lot of customization, a lot of creativity and agility, just like Jeff is talking about, and a lot of resilience, because it's an organic change that needs to happen for a long time. So we need to be measuring consistently and continually, how are things changing? How are they evolving? And is everybody having an equal employee experience? Because discrimination is a very, very high risk.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll maybe come back to that idea of measurement and actually how you track performance across these multiple different environments a little bit later in the call. But just to touch upon that idea of employee experience, I guess we've all probably been used to a certain extent over the last 12 months of having this very equitable employee experience. Everybody's pretty much had the same experience. They all have their same real estate in their Zoom or their Teams box. And everybody has an equal say in the conversation. The experience has been similar for everybody. As soon as you start moving to a hybrid model, there is a danger, as you say, of this almost two-tiered system, or potential bias or discrimination, or even just the experience not being as good for certain employees as it is for others. So what have you seen work really well in terms of guarding against that?
Well, as with any change management process, a lack of adequate planning or strategy is really going to be the downfall here. And we're seeing that in action with so many organizations that are saying, well, the office is open for whoever wants to go back. And if you don't want to go back yet, that's fine. We'll have a future plan later down the road. And that is the most risky approach that you can take, and the most dangerous for your workforce, because all that does is make the glass ceiling about 6 inches thicker, that people that are privileged and able and flexible enough to be able to go back into the office are going to go back. They're going to have what we call a proximity bias, in which there's conversations that happen on site and promotions that come from that visibility and law of recency. And so it creates this and incubates this ecosystem on site. And then there's other people that are limited and maybe can't go back into the office, that do not have access to that ecosystem, and their employee experience and career stagnancy is affected. So we really need to make sure that as we're going back to these return to office plans, that they are coming from a big place of strategic planning and data-based decision making.
Yeah, great. Many thanks, Laurel. Jack, let's maybe bring you into the conversation as well here. And I'd like to get your take on this. I see most organizations managed to scramble pretty effectively in the first days of the pandemic in terms of pivoting to remote working, shifting everybody to these new ways of delivering and doing so at scale. But I guess many of the solutions were, by their very nature, a bit ad hoc, expedient perhaps, rather than ideal. So what challenges do you see on the horizon for technology leaders as they try to move to this more hybrid model?
Well, that's a great question. And it's interesting because our research showed in the early stages of the pandemic, when people were struggling to get everybody online from remote work, that they did a lot of compromising, especially around security. And one of the things that we found was that as many as 65% of organizations, how shall I put this nicely, compromised their security rather than just eliminated it, right? Anything you could do to get people online, companies that would never have allowed you to use your own home personal computer to access corporate assets suddenly had to do so. The same computer that your kids were using to play games on, who knows what's on there, but they needed to get people up and running and do it quickly. I know of companies, in fact, that were struggling to find PCs for their workers. They would actually send their IT department folks out to various big box stores in the US, Best Buy or Walmart or whoever it might be, to try and find whatever PCs were available to buy so they could get them to their users. So it was a real struggle up front. The bigger problem, though, was that many companies weren't scaled up to be able to support these mobile workers. And we always think about the mobile workforce as the ones that we need to empower, but we forget that IT had a real issue as well. You couldn't just walk over to my PC anymore and fix it. You had to worry about, first of all, the IT folks were at home. And so I was working at home, they were working at home. How do I connect up so they can get my machine up and running? How do they fix what my problems are, no matter what my problems are? That was a real issue. It's gotten better. Our research shows now that the majority of companies have gone back to a strategy of let's be secure, let's be manageable, let's be efficient, let's be effective. But we start to think about where we need to go in the future, and that's a different problem. Right now, I consider most companies in generation one collaboration work. That is to say, they put together whatever tool sets they needed to get the job done. They gave you components as opposed to integrated approaches. They allowed users to pick and choose what they wanted often. Could be Zoom, could be Microsoft Teams, could be WebEx, could be whatever you happen to want to use, and then figured out how to make all of that work directly. People had Slack already, but you needed other stuff. Generation 2 requires that we look at this much more as an integrated approach. And in fact, the vendors are doing that as well. So in the early days, when you had components, now we're talking about companies like Microsoft with Viva, Citrix with their workspace capabilities are adding Rike, which is a workflow capability. Google has enhanced their Office tools. There are others out there, VMware, et cetera. What we're seeing is a move towards an integrated approach to collaboration, the ability to work from anywhere, but within a single unified environment. So as a user, don't have to learn 14 different interfaces. And as an IT professional, I don't have to support 14 different applications for their problems. That's, I think, where the ultimate challenge is going to be. Companies need to be able to move to this next generation collaboration capability. It's more secure, it's more manageable, it's more efficient for the user, it's easier for the user to understand, and it's easier for IT to support. I think that's where the next generation, the next step, the next generational step will be.
Yeah, really interesting. Thanks, Jack. I can see both Laurel and Jeff nodding away there. Jeff, let's maybe get some thoughts from you on that. I guess in concert and in parallel to many firms, you probably face this need to pivot quickly, and so rolling out at pace was the order of the day when you first approached this shift to different ways of working. Are you now starting to revisit some of those initial moves and actually look at how you can refine them, how you can take a more integrated approach that Jack was just talking about there?
Yes, and Jack made some, I think, very significant points there. But for us, the good news was, as an organization, being a financial services institution, we had some folks that were working from home, and we had those security measures in place to protect ourselves. And so for us, it was a question of scale. Example, we are on Office 365, so we use Teams, and our collaboration tools were readily available. Our challenge was, how do you scale when you're going from 20% of the organization being remote to everyone being remote? And that's where we faced a lot of challenges, whether it was getting the infrastructure in place, like laptops, et cetera, because not everyone was issued a laptop. Not everyone was allowed to work from home. And so the first few days were challenging for us, and especially for our infrastructure team that did a bang-up job, is to making sure that we followed the secure protocols while we were giving access to people, whether it was their own device or companies' devices. So we were lucky in that respect, but I can see where a lot of companies still on-prem, not having collaboration tools, where it was a bigger challenge for them.
Yeah, interesting. Laurel, let's get some thoughts from you on that as well. I guess this is something that you've seen over the course of the last couple of years. It's one thing shifting pockets of employees to remote working. It's actually a significant undertaking doing it at scale.
Yes, it's a very different conversation when you're just conducting a trial with one team or one person saying, yes, that person is allowed to work remotely for X amount of time. But then to implement that in your organization is a very, very different conversation. And I think that we're having a really great conversation identifying that it is not just a tech problem. That is the number one, very first step that every organization needs to take, is to get all of the members of the executive team at the table together, discussing how this is each going to impact all of their organizations, all of their departments. This is not just a tool conversation. This is not just an ops conversation. This is not just an HR conversation. We need to work together holistically and comprehensively to manage all of the ripple effects, because there is a very big difference between just allowing people to work in a different place versus really optimizing operations as a virtual and remote friendly organization. So we need to work together in cross departments in order to see that highest level of success.
Yeah, absolutely. And Laurel, just to follow up on that, I guess the experience that people have had over the last 12 months is not necessarily a true reflection of virtual work, because there have been additional anxieties and stresses and pressures in play here. Living and working through a global pandemic is very different, and maybe we shouldn't conflate the two. Do you agree with that idea?
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you opened the door to that conversation, because I have been working remotely and managing virtual organizations and hybrid organizations for 15 years. And this past year has been extremely abnormal and stressful and anxiety inducing for me as well. And for all of the other remote work thought leaders that I collaborate with on a daily basis, there was a bit of shame in the beginning, or embarrassment of, is this hard for you too? And we said, yeah, it's hard for me too. So this is not normal circumstances. What's happening right now is an international contingency plan for a global catastrophe. This is not remote work in action as usual. So what we need to be planning for is not maintaining what's happening now, but building a new program and a new model that will be more sustainable for the future. And that's a much, much different conversation, because the sustainability is the harder part of remote work adoption for organizations. Going remote, believe it or not, is the easy part. As challenging as it has been for all of us over the past year, that's a kind of a snap of your fingers. But adopting remote work in a way that is sustainable and long-term and will continue to grow in efficiency, that's the real challenge. So we have work ahead of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Many thanks, Laurel. Jack, I'm going to come back to you if I can. Now, obviously, Laurel mentioned there this idea of this being a multifaceted conversation and actually requiring input from multiple different functions, whether that be facilities or HR or senior leadership, strategic planning, etc. But of course, technology has a huge role to play in this. We have an audience of technologists here. So I guess kind of what would you advise them to start thinking about in terms of the role that technology plays in moving towards this hybrid model? What should they be considering as the most important priorities?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's really critical because in many organizations, the IT organization, the CIO, are seen as service organizations. They're seen as, we'll figure out what we want to do and you just make it happen. In truth, the CIO and especially the IT organization should be leaders in this space. They should be looking at what kind of technologies will make it easier for the organization to do whatever it needs to be, whatever it needs to do, and whatever needs to be done, whether it's on-premise, whether it's remote, whether it's from home, whether it's from Mars or the moon. At this point, it's going to be all over the place. And so number one, I would suggest is that the CIO needs to think about being a strategic advisor rather than just a tactician making things happen after the fact. That's number one. Number two is most organizations that we've talked to, and we've done a lot of research in this space, do a fairly poor job of actually asking their end user community, the employees, what's good and what's bad, what's working for them and what isn't. My suggestion, and I think this needs to be mandatory in all organizations, if you're not already doing it, is to make sure that you're polling your users. Figure out what's working for them, what isn't working for them. And this isn't just done once every 6 years, right? This should be on a 3-month, 6-month basis, whatever it needs to be. There needs to be a true feedback loop so you can adjust your strategy to make it work. If you don't do that, you're going to be guaranteed going to be an inefficient organization. There's just no other way around it. Number three, and I think this is also very critical, whatever you're going to do from an IT perspective, make sure you get senior executive buy-in. A lot of companies I've talked to have the IT department off doing their thing without a buy-in, and suddenly, 3 months into a new technology rollout, the executive suite comes along and says, geez, it's really not working, start over. That's a really bad way to operate an organization, but it happens often. And our research shows that it's probably true in about 50 to 60% of organizations. It's getting better, but it's not where it needs to be. And the final piece, I guess I would say, is you probably want to put together a working group. Call it whatever you'd like, whether it's a collaboration working group or a remote working group or whatever it is, that consists of all of the parties that are interested. So it's not just IT, it's marketing, it's sales, it's the manufacturing shop floor if you have one of those. It's certainly HR, it's legal, it's a whole group. This isn't necessarily 100 people getting in a room, but this is 4, 5, 6, 10 people meeting on a regular basis to find out what's working and what isn't working in your organization, and then make recommendations to the executive suite. If you do that, you're going to see a lot fewer problems longer term, and you're going to be able to cope with the scale and the changes needed to make remote work and distributed work, hybrid work for your organization.